The Zy'rak homeworld was a place of towering obsidian spires, sharp angles, and a sky that burned with violet dusk. It wasn't my first diplomatic mission, but it was shaping up to be the shortest. My hands were bound behind my back, my face inches from the cold floor of the great hall, and a dozen armored guards aimed energy spears at my throat. I had made a mistake. A severe one, apparently. The hall was deathly silent except for the heavy breathing of the gathered Zy'rak nobles. At the center of it all stood the one person who could decide whether I lived or died, Commander Zy'rak, the one I had unwittingly offended. She was clad in a ceremonial crimson mantle, the color of impending judgment. "You have disgraced me before my people, human," she said, her voice sharp as a blade. "You have seen what no outsider was meant to see." I swallowed hard. "Okay, I'm gonna be honest. I have no idea what I did." The gathered Zy'rak bristled, their dark eyes narrowing. Zy'rak's own glare was enough to incinerate me on the spot if looks could kill. "You saw me," she said through clenched teeth. "Unclothed." That took a moment to register. I replayed the past hour in my head. My diplomatic escort, the wrong turn, the dimly lit chamber, and then, right, the door I opened. The flash of pale markings across dark skin. Her startled gasp before I backed out and apologized. It had been an accident. A mistake. But by the way the Zy'rak were acting, I had committed a capital offense. I exhaled. "Look, I didn't mean to." "Silence," one of the elders roared. "You have violated the sacred tenets of our people. The penalty is death." The air in the hall grew suffocating. Zy'rak warriors tightened their grips on their weapons, and I felt the weight of inevitability press down on me. Zy'rak spoke, her tone measured but firm. "There is another path." The murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. I had the sinking feeling I wasn't going to like this alternative. "You have seen me as only a mate should," she said. "By the laws of the Zy'rak, you must take responsibility. You must marry me." A long silence followed. I blinked. "I what?" "The alternative is death," she reiterated. I looked at her, then at the warriors surrounding me, and then back at her. Surely, this was some elaborate joke. A terrifying, cultural misunderstanding-induced joke. But no one was laughing. I let out a slow, controlled breath. "So, just to clarify, my choices are execution or marriage." Zy'rak nodded once. Yes, it was, without a doubt, the most insane diplomatic crisis I had ever encountered. And yet, as I weighed my options, I realized there was only one answer. I wasn't ready to die today. "Fine," I said. "I'll marry you." The hall erupted into chaos. Some shouted in protest, others in shock. The elders convened in hushed voices, debating whether a human Zy'rak union was even possible under their laws. Zy'rak turned to them, her expression unreadable. "He has accepted," she said. "By our traditions, the matter is settled." An elder with jagged facial markings stepped forward. "A ritual must be performed to legitimize the bond. Cannot be avoided." I resisted the urge to groan. Of course, there was a ritual. I stole a glance at Zy'rak. She stood rigid, her jaw clenched, her dark eyes unreadable. She wasn't any happier about this than I was. The elder continued, "The bonding ceremony will take place at first light. Until then, the human will be confined to the ceremonial quarters." That sounded a lot better than a prison cell, at least. The guards hoisted me up, undoing my bindings but keeping a close watch as they escorted me out of the hall. As I was led away, I cast one final glance at Zy'rak. Her expression remained unchanged, but in the depths of her gaze, I thought I saw something else. Something beyond duty and obligation. Resignation. Like me, she knew we had no way out of this. At least not yet. The cold stone walls of the ceremonial quarters did little to ease my nerves. I sat cross-legged on a low platform, my hands resting in my lap as the weight of the situation began to settle in. I was supposed to be a diplomat, a negotiator, a human representative of peaceful coexistence between species. Instead, I was here, in an alien stronghold, facing an ancient law that required me to marry a Zy'rak commander or face execution. The door to my quarters opened with a hiss, and Zalvana entered. Her presence was commanding, like the pressure of a storm before it unleashed its fury. She didn't speak right away, merely studied me as I stood to greet her, unsure of what to say. "You're still here," I said, breaking the silence. Zalvana's gaze flickered briefly over me, the edges of her lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile, nor a frown. "I see no reason to kill you yet, human." "Good to know," I said dryly, though I'm sure the others are eager to get on with it. Her posture shifted, becoming more rigid. "You are mistaken. The elders are debating. It is not simple for us to accept a human marriage." "Is it because of me? Or because I'm human?" I asked. Zalvana narrowed her eyes but didn't answer right away. Instead, she circled the room, her gaze trailing the patterns on the walls, her mind clearly elsewhere. Finally, she spoke. "You are a foreigner, one who knows nothing of our customs. Yet you do not flinch. You do not beg for mercy. Most would cower." I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Most people would die before they'd face this ritual. I don't have that luxury. But you," I hesitated. "You've got a choice too. You don't have to go through with this." She turned to face me, her eyes sharp. "You are the one who must go through with it, right?" I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "But if you don't want this, we can find a way to get out of it." She stared at me for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of her entire world, she spoke. "You think this is a matter of desire, human? This is not about whether I want it. It is about honor, about duty." I didn't fully understand, but I knew enough to know that Zy'rak culture was built on a sense of obligation to their people, their laws, their traditions. To break them was not just a personal shame. It was a betrayal of everything their society held dear. "Then why don't you want this honor?" I asked, pushing. "If it's such a big deal, why haven't you just had me killed already?" Zalvana's gaze softened, if only slightly. "Because," she said, her voice lower, "I would not dishonor myself in such a way. And because you, human, have done something none of my people could. You have stood your ground." My brow furrowed. "That's it? You're letting me live because I didn't collapse in fear?" "You do not understand," she replied, a hint of frustration creeping into her tone. "In my culture, to marry without honor is to bring shame not only to the individual but to their family, their clan, their very bloodline. And yet you did not falter. You chose life over death. And for that, I respect you." There was a long pause. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Respect was a strange word in a situation like this. Respect for what? For agreeing to a fate I had no choice in? For not running away? "What happens if I refuse the marriage?" I asked. Zalvana's eyes hardened again. "You will be killed, and my people will consider me dishonored." I glanced at the floor, thinking hard. "There's no way out of this, then, is there?" She didn't answer, but I could see the resignation in her eyes. The silence that followed stretched out for what felt like forever. I was trapped in this web of their customs, their rules, and yet the more I learned about them, the less sense it made. I wasn't the one who had broken their sacred laws. They had never considered the possibility that a human might find themselves in this mess. The tension in the room was thick, suffocating, and I couldn't stand it any longer. "Look, Zalvana, I get that this is a big deal for you, and that you have to save face for your people. But at the end of the day, you're a warrior, right? You're supposed to lead, not follow some old rules that make no sense in a situation like this." She stiffened at my words, her eyes narrowing. "You think our ways are senseless?" I didn't say that, but it doesn't make sense for both of us to die for a mistake. Does it? We're both stuck in this mess. But there's got to be a better way out. I could see the flicker of indecision in her eyes. "You think you can change the laws of the Zy'rak?" "Not change them. Work within them." I took a step toward her. "You're right, your honor is everything. But so is survival, right? And maybe, just maybe, you and I could survive this together without all this unnecessary bloodshed." She was silent for a moment, her gaze moving to the door, as if weighing the gravity of my words. "I did not choose this, human. But I will hear your words. There must be a way to honor my people's ways without condemning both of us. I nodded, feeling a surge of hope, a sliver of possibility breaking through the oppressive atmosphere. Exactly. You want honor. I want to live. Let's find a way to make that happen. Zalvanna studied me, her eyes searching mine. Slowly, the tension in her shoulders began to ease, and she nodded. Very well, she said. We will seek a way to make this work. But know this, there is no room for failure. If we are to survive, we must both give everything. I'm in, I said. Let's make it happen. And so, in that cold, dimly lit chamber, we began the delicate process of finding a way out of the situation. A way that respected the Zy'rak's honor, but that also allowed for survival. There were no easy answers, but there was one thing I knew for sure: we weren't going to just give up. Neither of us. Not yet. The trial was set. The Zy'rak had spoken, and I had no choice but to accept. But there was no way I was going to just sit back and let this be decided on their terms. I had one shot at surviving this, and it wasn't going to come from following their archaic customs. The Zy'rak believed in honor, in proving worth through action, and in the challenge of combat. But I wasn't a warrior, I was a diplomat. I wasn't here to fight, I was here to think. And right now, that was the only edge I had. Zalvanna stood across from me, her eyes never leaving mine, her stance poised and rigid. The challenge is clear, she said. You will prove your strength, your worth. The trial will test you, human. I nodded. I'm not here to fight you, Zalvanna. I'm here to win. She didn't respond to my words. She didn't need to. In her world, there was only one way to win: combat. Her people respected strength, not negotiation. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to make them see me as a peer, not a victim. The challenge was a hunt. A hunt in the deep caverns beneath the Zy'rak city, where deadly predators roamed freely. No weapon was allowed, only the strength of will and body. The Zy'rak believed this would show who was worthy. It was brutal, savage, and exactly the kind of situation where most would give up and die. I wasn't most people. Zalvanna gave me a final look, and without another word, the challenge began. The moment I stepped into the caverns, the temperature dropped, the air heavy with the scent of danger. The walls of the tunnel were slick, dripping with moisture, and the silence was only broken by the occasional echo of a distant growl. This was their testing ground, a place where even the Zy'rak had to fight for survival. I wasn't going to survive on brute strength alone. That much was obvious. I needed to outsmart whatever creatures lurked in the shadows. I had been briefed on the creatures in the caverns. Large, predatory, and capable of camouflage. They hunted in packs, and they were fast. Any mistake would cost me dearly. But I wasn't going to make mistakes. Not today. I moved quietly through the tunnel, my eyes scanning every surface, looking for movement, listening for any sound that could signal danger. The Zy'rak believed in proving physical dominance, but I was about to show them that intelligence could be just as powerful. Then I heard it, a low growl, barely audible, coming from above me. I stopped, frozen in place, and looked up. There, perched on the ceiling, was one of the creatures. Its dark, camouflaged form blended perfectly with the stone, but I could see the faint outline of its body as it shifted. I didn't wait for it to pounce. I rolled to the side, dodging its attack as it lunged at me with incredible speed. It missed, crashing into the wall with a thud. In that instant, I reached into my pouch and pulled out a small device I had crafted. A simple electromagnetic pulse generator. The creature was momentarily stunned, its natural instincts knocked offline by the pulse. It wasn't dead, but it was disoriented, and that gave me the window I needed. I quickly moved to its side, using its momentary confusion to slip past it, staying low to the ground and staying out of its line of sight. This wasn't about killing. It was about surviving, outsmarting the challenge. I didn't hear the creature again. Whether it had given up or whether it was simply waiting for another chance to strike, I couldn't know. But I had no intention of waiting around to find out. I moved faster, deeper into the cave system. There would be more. After what felt like an eternity of navigating the twisting tunnels, I encountered a group of Zy'rak warriors positioned at various points along the cavern, watching the trial unfold. They weren't there to help, but to observe. This was their culture, this was their test. I approached one of the guards, a massive Zy'rak whose crimson armor gleamed in the low light. He raised his hand, signaling me to stop. "You are not permitted to pass," he said in a gravelly voice. "The trial is meant to prove your strength, your worth." I wasn't here to prove my strength to him, though. I was here to prove it to the only person who mattered, Zalvanna. "Then why are you here?" I asked, staring him down. "Are you going to stop me from completing the challenge?" The Zy'rak paused, and in that moment, I saw the conflict in his eyes. He was bound by his duty, but I was bound by survival. "I'm not going to kill anyone, but I will find a way through," I said. "And I will prove that I'm worthy of surviving this, even if I have to do it without following your rules." The Zy'rak hesitated. "You defy the trial?" "Not the trial. Just your idea of how it's supposed to go." Without another word, I moved past him, keeping my focus forward. I had a new plan, and it was simple. Get to the heart of the caverns, avoid the predators, and show Zalvanna that humans had the ability to think, adapt, and survive, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Time passed in a blur. The trial was a test of endurance, of intellect, and of patience. Every time I thought I had made progress, another predator would appear, another obstacle would rise. But I didn't back down. Couldn't. By the time I reached the final chamber, I was battered and bruised, my energy depleted, but my resolve stronger than ever. This was where the Zy'rak believed the trial would end. This was where I would prove that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its might, but in its capacity to think, adapt, and survive against all odds. I faced the last test. A massive, hulking creature that could easily rip me apart with a single swipe. But I wasn't going to fight it head-on. I wasn't stupid. I reached into my pouch again, pulling out a flare. As the creature lunged at me, I tossed the flare directly into its face. The bright light blinded it, giving me the opening I needed to duck beneath its swing and maneuver around it. The creature roared in frustration, disoriented. I grabbed the first weapon I could find, a jagged stone, and drove it into a pressure point I had learned from my earlier encounters. The creature staggered, collapsed, and finally stopped moving. The trial was over. I didn't care about the victory. I cared about the message I had sent. I had survived by using my mind, not my muscle. I had proven that there was more to strength than just brawn. I wasn't a warrior, but today I was a survivor, and that would have to be enough. The ceremony was supposed to be a formality, a final step in cementing the unorthodox union between me and Zalvanna. But to me, it felt like a stark reminder of everything I had just gone through. Surviving the hunt was one thing, surviving their judgment another. The Zy'rak had seen me fight, had seen me stand my ground. But now they were going to see me kneel in a completely different sense. The final act of this strange, forced union was a ritual designed to symbolize the commitment we were about to make. According to the elders, it would bind us, human and Zy'rak, together for life. If I made it through this, I would be their mate, bound by their traditions, by their laws. There would be no turning back. Zalvanna stood before me, her posture regal, her expression as cold as ever. Yet, I could see the faintest flicker of something in her eyes. Uncertainty. "You are ready?" she asked, her voice a whisper in the stillness. I nodded. "Ready as I'll ever be." The elder who led the ceremony stepped forward, his voice booming across the hall. "By the ancient laws of our people, we bind this union. The human has shown his worth. The Zy'rak has accepted him. Let this bond be sealed in the eyes of the ancestors and all who stand witness." I had no idea what the hell I was walking into, but I had no choice now. Couldn't back out. There was no escape, not for me and certainly not for Zalvanna. The elder turned to face me, extending a ceremonial blade toward me. It wasn't sharp. It was a symbol, token, but the weight of it felt like it was digging into my chest. "Place your hand upon the blade," the elder commanded. I did. I wasn't sure why. It was a gesture of submission, of commitment, but that was the point. There was no way out. The room was silent as Zy'rak stepped closer, her dark eyes meeting mine. There was no hatred there, no anger, only a quiet acknowledgement of the situation we both found ourselves in. She placed her hand on top of mine, and the instant she did, something shifted. The energy in the room changed, thickening like a storm that had been gathering for hours. The silence that had reigned before seemed to crack open, replaced by an unspoken tension that neither of us had expected. "This is the first step," Zy'rak said, her voice barely audible but carrying with it the weight of her own doubts. "You are bound to me and I to you. Our fates are entwined." I looked down at our hands, both now on the ceremonial blade. "Our fates are entwined," I repeated, trying to make sense of it all. The elder raised his voice again, sealing the moment. "Let the bond be forged." The room trembled with the words, a sudden, overwhelming wave of energy sweeping through me. I didn't know what was happening, but it felt like the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something. And then, it hit me. This wasn't just a marriage. It wasn't just an acceptance of the situation. This was a life-altering change, a merging of destinies that neither I nor Zy'rak had asked for. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were now part of something much larger than ourselves. The weight of that realization settled over me like a second skin, tightening with each passing second. The elder stepped back, leaving the blade between us. There was nothing left to do but wait. The air was thick with anticipation, with the presence of the Zy'rak ancestors watching us from beyond. I could see the flicker of hesitation in Zy'rak's eyes. I knew what she was thinking. Could this work? Would it work? The same thoughts were swirling in my own head. We had been forced into this, but that didn't mean we couldn't make something of it. I squeezed her hand, my grip firm but not overpowering. A small gesture, but I hoped it conveyed what I couldn't say with words. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning. Zy'rak met my gaze, her expression hardening. She didn't speak, but her grip on my hand tightened as if to acknowledge the unspoken vow we had just made. We had been thrust together by circumstances, but now, it was up to us to decide how we would move forward. The elder nodded, satisfied. "You are now bound. No more trials. No more tests. You are one." The words echoed in the chamber, the finality of it sinking deep into my bones. One. That was it. This was no longer just a matter of survival or of being forced into a situation. This was life. We were in this together, for better or worse. And for the first time since all this started, I realized something. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. This wasn't a fate I would have chosen for myself. It wasn't a future I had ever imagined. But it was mine now, and somehow that made all the difference. As the ceremony came to a close, the crowd slowly began to disperse, the tension in the room easing just a little. The bond had been forged, and with it the possibility of a new life, a new future had begun to take root. Zy'rak stepped back, and I did the same. The space between us wasn't wide, but it felt like it stretched for miles. We had come through the trial. We had come through the marriage. And now we would have to come through everything that came after. Together.